They built a kingdom around my family's land, then they tried to treat me like a peasant. The HOA president thought she could ban me from the pool. She forgot one tiny detail. Voice drops to a whisper. I don't just use the water, I own the dirt. They say land is the only thing they aren't making more of. My grandfather, I called him Lolo, was a man who understood the weight of the earth. He wasn't a billionaire, just a man with iron discipline and a sharp eye for the future. Decades ago, when the province was nothing but dust and potential, he bought up acres of what most people thought was worthless scrubland. Most of that inheritance is quiet, coconut groves swaying in the breeze and rice paddies that I lease out to local farmers. But one specific lot, that one was a fluke of history. Years ago, a massive developer bought a sprawling tract of land that completely surrounded my Lolo's property. They built the Crestwood Estates, a high-end, gated community with uniform houses and manicured lawns. They offered my Lolo a fortune for his lot. They begged, they pleaded, but my grandfather was a stubborn man. He told them, "A man without land is a man without a soul." So the developer built around him. My family property became a strange, green island of defiance in the middle of a sea of suburban luxury. When I inherited that lot, I inherited his stubbornness too. A few years back, the Crestwood HOA approached me. They were in a bind. They wanted a community pool, a clubhouse, and a playground for their residents. But they had a problem. They had built on every square inch of their own territory. The only open space large enough for their dream was my lot. They asked to buy it. I remembered Lolo's voice, "Never sell the land, Marcus." I didn't sell. Instead, I did something I thought was kind. I leased it to them for 10 years. I gave it to them for peanuts, way below the market rate. My logic was simple. A beautiful pool facility would increase my property value, and it felt good to let the community benefit from my family's history. The contract was ironclad but generous. They would build the facilities, maintain the grounds, and pay the property taxes. In exchange, I, the landowner, retained the right to use the facilities whenever I pleased. It was my land, after all. The lease even had a nuclear clause, a 90-day termination notice if either party committed a material breach of the terms. For the first few years, the water was crystal clear and the peace was absolute. I'd head down to the pool a couple of times a month, usually on quiet weekday mornings. The security guards knew my face. The old-timers would wave. It was a perfect arrangement until Beverly arrived. Beverly wasn't just a resident, she was a parasite of power. Within 6 months of moving in, she had maneuvered, manipulated, and steamrolled her way into the HOA presidency. She didn't see a community, she saw a kingdom. And in her kingdom, there was no room for a landowner she couldn't control. The first time I met her was at a stakeholder meeting. I was there as an observer, curious about their plans for expansion. 10 minutes into the session, Beverly stopped mid-sentence and pointed a sharp, manicured finger at me. "Who is this?" she demanded. "And why is a non-member polluting a private meeting?" Arthur, the former president, a man of class, tried to explain. "Beverly, this is Marcus. He's the owner of the land we're sitting on." She didn't even blink, she just cut him off with a sneer. "Non-members don't belong here. Rules are rules, out." Arthur looked at me with eyes full of pity and whispered an apology afterward. He told me Beverly was obsessed with procedures and exclusivity. I told him it was fine. I didn't care about their boring meetings. But Arthur had a look on his face, a look that said the storm was only just beginning. Over the next year, the new rules started appearing like weeds. No guests without 48-hour notice. No entry without an official HOA membership card. Beverly was building a wall, and she was determined to keep me on the outside. I showed up one Tuesday, towel in hand. The guard, Leo, looked at me with genuine fear. "I'm sorry, Mr. Marcus, President's orders. No card, no pool." "Leo," I said calmly, "I don't need a card. This is my property." He let me in, but he was shaking. 3 days later, the first letter arrived, signed by Beverly. It said my access was under review and that I was forbidden from using the facilities until her board, gave me permission. I looked out my window at the blue water shimmering on my land. I realized then that Beverly didn't just want to run the HOA. She wanted a war. And I was about to give her one. She sent me a letter banning me from my own land. So I showed up anyway. I didn't come for a swim. I came to show her that a crown doesn't mean anything when you're standing on someone else's throne. The letter sat on my mahogany desk, its ink practically dripping with Beverly's arrogance. It was a formal notification informing me that my access to the facilities was under review, and that I should refrain from entering the property until the board reached a verdict. It was a move of pure, calculated dominance. She was trying to treat the landowner like a common trespasser. But Beverly had made a fatal mistake. She assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. She didn't realize that my grandfather's stubbornness didn't just mean holding on to land. It meant holding on to my rights. I knew every comma and period in that lease agreement. Article 7, Section 3 was my shield and my sword. I retained the right to reasonable personal use of any facilities built on my property. It wasn't a request. It was a condition of their existence. I decided to test the depth of her delusion. The following Saturday, the sun was a blistering hammer over the suburbs. The Crestwood Pool and Social Club was teeming with residents seeking refuge in the water I provided for them. I grabbed my towel, tucked a copy of the lease into my bag, and walked toward the gate. The guard at the gate looked like he wanted to vanish. "Mr. Sterling," he stammered, his eyes darting toward the HOA office. "I was told your name is on the restricted list." I didn't argue with him. I simply opened the lease to the highlighted section and held it up. "This is a legal contract, Leo. If you stop me, you're helping the HOA commit a material breach. Are you prepared to testify in court for Beverly?" He went pale and stepped aside. I walked onto the pool deck, the scent of chlorine and expensive sunblock filling the air. I found a lounge chair in a quiet corner and began to settle in, but the peace lasted less than 60 seconds. I felt her before I saw her, that sharp clicking sound of designer sandals on the concrete. Beverly was marching toward me, her face a mask of suburban fury. Behind her, a few residents stopped swimming to watch the spectacle. "You," she hissed, standing directly over me. "I sent you a legal notice. You were told explicitly that you are not permitted on these grounds." I didn't even look up from my book. "And I sent you a copy of the lease, Beverly. You are a tenant. I am the owner. You don't have the authority to ban me from a grain of sand on this lot." "This is a private community," she shrieked, her voice cracking the afternoon silence. "We pay the taxes. We built this clubhouse. You are a non-member who is exploiting our resources." I finally looked her in the eyes. They were cold, narrow, and entirely devoid of reason. "You pay the taxes because that was the price of the lease. You built the clubhouse on land I gave you for next to nothing. If you want to talk about exploitation, let's talk about the market rate rent you aren't paying me." Beverly's hands were shaking. "I've had our legal counsel look at your claims. Your grandfather is dead. His privileges died with him. You have no standing here." It was the most insane legal logic I had ever heard. Property rights don't evaporate because of a death certificate, Beverly. They transfer. And right now, they are sitting in this chair. "Leave," she commanded, pointing toward the exit. "Leave now, or I will have security physically remove you for trespassing." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Call them. I'd love to see the look on the sheriff's face when he realizes he's being asked to arrest a man for sitting in his own backyard." She didn't call security, not yet. She stared at me for a long, vibrating moment, her chest heaving. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that I wasn't going to blink. "Fine," she whispered, her voice low and dangerous. "You want to play by the rules? I will make the rules so tight they will choke you. You think you're a stakeholder? I'll make sure every person in this subdivision knows exactly what kind of neighbor you are." She turned on her heel and stormed off. I stayed for another hour, but the water felt colder. I could feel the eyes of the other residents on me, suspicious, whispered judgments beginning to circulate. Beverly wasn't just going to use the law. She was going to use the community as a weapon. I didn't know it then, but the exclusive paradise I had helped them build was about to become a psychological battleground. And the next person she sent after me wouldn't be a lawyer. It would be her son, Tyler. The HOA president couldn't break me, so she sent her son to do her dirty work. He thought his mother's title made him untouchable. He was about to find out that being a prince means nothing when you're trespassing on a king's land. The atmosphere in Crestwood had shifted. It was no longer a community. It was a cold, silent theater of war. Beverly had spent the last 2 weeks poisoning the well, spreading whispers that I was a scammer, a squatter, and a threat to the neighborhood's exclusivity. I felt the frost every time I walked near the gates. The friendly waves from the guards had been replaced by nervous, downward glances. But I wouldn't be intimidated. I was a sterling, we don't retreat. On a Saturday afternoon, when the sun was high and the pool was at its most crowded, I returned. I wasn't there to cause a scene. I just wanted the peace I was legally entitled to. I found a small, empty lounge chair in the far corner, away from the main splash zone. I opened my book, hoping the heat of the day would drown out the tension. Then I heard him, Tyler. He was 17 years old, draped in the kind of unearned confidence that only comes from being the child of someone in power. He arrived with a pack of 3 friends, all of them moving through the pool area like they owned every drop of water in the basin. Tyler wasn't just there to swim, he was there to perform. I was mid-lap in the deep end when it happened. Crash. A massive cannonball sent a wall of chlorinated water straight into my face, breaking my rhythm and sending me coughing toward the tile. I surfaced to the sound of raucous, mocking laughter. Tyler was standing on the edge, looking down at me with a smirk that mirrored his mother. "Watch out, old man," he sneered. "Some of us actually use this pool for fun. Maybe you should find a bathtub more your speed." I'm in my 30s, hardly old, but I didn't engage. I climbed out, dried my face, and sat back down on my chair. I chose silence. I chose to be the adult in the room, but Tyler took my silence for surrender. 20 minutes later, the group surrounded my lounge chair. They stood in a semicircle, blocking my son, their shadows long and aggressive over my book. "You're in my spot," Tyler said, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of the nearby families. I looked around. There were dozens of empty chairs, no towels, no bags. "There's no name on this chair, Tyler," I said quietly. "My mom is the president," he snapped, taking a step into my personal space. "This is her pool. That means everything in it belongs to me. You aren't even a member. You're the guy who keeps trying to sneak in. My mom told me all about you." The irony was thick enough to choke on. A teenager, living in a house his mother didn't own, was trying to evict the man who owned the very ground his designer sandals were touching. "Tyler," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Your mother is a tenant. This HOA is a tenant. You have as much right to this chair as I do, probably less, considering I'm the one who hasn't been splashing elderly residents all afternoon." His face contorted. He didn't have an argument, so he resorted to the only power he thought he had. "I'm banning you," he shouted, his voice cracking with prepubescent rage. "I'm banning you from this pool right now. Get out before I call security and have you dragged out in front of everyone." I actually felt a spark of amusement. "You're banning me? On what authority?" "On my authority," he yelled. He pulled out his phone and started recording me, shoving the camera inches from my face. "Look at this loser, guys. The squatter is refusing to leave. Let's see how tough he is when the guards get here." He called the guard over. The poor man, caught between a legal contract and the president's spoiled son, looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. "Sir," the guard whispered to me, "please, just for today, it's not worth the trouble." "It's my land, Leo," I replied, loud enough for Tyler to hear, "and I'm not moving an inch." Tyler's eyes went wide. He wasn't used to hearing the word no. He turned back to his phone, but this time he wasn't recording. He was dialing. "Mom," he said into the receiver, his voice suddenly becoming small and victimized. "He's here again, and he's harassing us. You need to get down here right now." I sat back and waited. I knew what was coming. The queen was about to arrive to protect her prince, and she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. The HOA president didn't just want me gone, she wanted me in handcuffs. She called the police to arrest me for trespassing on my own soil. She thought she was winning. She didn't realize she was handing me the keys to her destruction. 10 minutes, that's all it took for the peaceful afternoon to shatter. I sat there motionless as the sound of a high-performance SUV screeched to a halt in the parking lot. Beverly didn't walk through the gate, she exploded through it. She was still in her business casual attire, clutching her phone like a weapon. Tyler saw her and immediately shifted into his victim role, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "Mom, he's being aggressive. He threatened us when we asked him to leave." Tyler lied, his voice loud enough for the gathering crowd of neighbors to hear. Beverly didn't even look at me first. She looked at the security guard, Leo. "Why is he still sitting there? I gave you a direct order. Why hasn't he been removed?" "Ma'am, he has the lease documents," Leo started, but she cut him off with a scream that silenced the entire pool area. "I don't care about his fraudulent papers. I am the president of this association, and I am telling you to get him out." She then turned her fury toward me. Her face was a shade of purple I hadn't seen outside of a medical textbook. "You think you're smart, Marcus? You think you can bully my son and ignore our bylaws? I told you this was a private facility. You are a trespasser, and in this state we know how to handle people who don't respect private property." I remained seated. I didn't raise my voice. "Beverly, for the last time, look at the contract. You are making a massive legal mistake." "The only mistake here was being nice to you for so long," she shrieked. And then the sound that everyone was waiting for. The low, rhythmic chirp of a siren. 2 police cruisers pulled up to the curb, their blue and red lights dancing off the surface of the pool water. Beverly's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. She practically ran to the gate to meet the officers. 2 deputies stepped out. One was older, with a weathered face that looked like it had seen every neighborhood dispute in the county. The other was younger, hand resting instinctively on his belt. Beverly began her assault immediately. "Officers, thank God you're here. We have a trespasser who has been harassing the residents and refusing to leave private property. He's been told multiple times that he is banned, but he's being defiant and aggressive toward my son." The older officer, Deputy Miller, looked at the crowd, then at Tyler, who was still filming, and finally at me. I stood up slowly, making sure my hands were visible. I didn't want to give her any more ammunition. "Is there a problem here, sir?" Miller asked, walking toward me. "No problem, officer," I said calmly. "Just a misunderstanding of property law. My name is Marcus Sterling. I am the owner of this land. This community, the Crestwood Estates, is currently leasing this specific lot from me." Beverly pushed past the officer. "He's lying. He's a squatter. His grandfather had an agreement, but this man has no membership. He doesn't pay HOA dues, therefore he has no rights to the amenities." I reached into my bag and pulled out a certified, notarized copy of the master lease agreement and my state ID. I handed them to Deputy Miller. "Officer, if you look at Article 7, Section 3, you'll see that as the lessor, I am granted full and unrestricted personal access to any and all facilities built on the premises. My dues are the thousands of dollars in rent I discount for this community every single month." Miller took the papers. He put on a pair of reading glasses and began to flip through them. The silence at the pool was absolute. Even the kids had stopped splashing. Beverly was smirking, whispering to Tyler that I was going to jail for forgery. Miller finished the first page, then the second. He looked at Beverly, then back at the paper. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice flat, "is this the current lease for the pool property?" "It's an old version, it's not valid," she stammered. "This is a certified copy from the county recorder's office, dated 3 months ago," Miller replied. He looked at me, then back at the HOA president. "Ma'am, I can't arrest this man. In fact, legally speaking, he has more right to be on this dirt than you do. This is a civil matter, and based on this document, he isn't trespassing. He's sitting in his own backyard." The smirk slid off Beverly's face like melting wax. But I revoked his access. I'm the president. You can't revoke a property owner's rights to his own land via an HOA vote, Beverly, I said, finally stepping forward. That's not how the law works. That's not how any of this works. Deputy Miller handed me back my papers. Sir, you're free to stay. Ma'am, if you call us again for this, we'll have to file a report for filing a false police claim. I suggest you talk to your lawyer before you make another move. The officers turned and walked away. Beverly stood there, humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. Tyler stopped filming, his face turning a deep, embarrassed red. But as I sat back down, Beverly leaned in, her voice a low, vibrating hiss. You think you won? She whispered. I'll make your life a living hell. You won't be able to walk down your own driveway without a fine. I'll ruin you, Marcus, I promise. I looked up at her and smiled. Beverly, you just brought the police to my property to harass me. You just committed a material breach of the peace. You shouldn't be worried about my driveway. You should be worried about where your residents are going to swim next month. Beverly couldn't win with the law, so she decided to bury me in paperwork. She thought a few fines would make me crawl away. She didn't realize she was just giving me a paper trail to her own execution. The defeat at the pool should have been the end of it. Any rational human being would have seen the blue lights, heard the deputy's warning, and retreated to rethink their life choices. But Beverly was not a rational human being. She was a woman who had tasted power in a small pond, and she was drowning in her own ego. The harassment didn't stop. It evolved. It started 3 days later. I went to my mailbox and found a thick yellow envelope. Inside were 5 separate notice of violation forms from the Crestwood HOA. Violation 1, improper lawn height. My grass was a perfect 2 inches. Violation 2, unauthorized exterior decoration. I had a small American flag on my porch. Violation 3, vehicle nuisance. My truck was parked in my own driveway, clean and operational. The list went on. Total fines, $1,250, due immediately. I leaned against my mailbox and looked toward Beverly's house at the end of the cul-de-sac. I could see the curtain twitch. She was watching. She wanted to see me break. She wanted to see me come over to her front door and beg for mercy so she could tell me no. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I didn't even call her. Instead, I called my lawyer, a man named Silas who specialized in land use and had a temperament like a hungry shark. Silas, I said, looking at the fines. The queen of the HOA is sending me love letters. She's trying to find a man who isn't even a member of her association for bylaw infractions on land that isn't part of her jurisdiction. Silas chuckled a dry, raspy sound. She's reaching, Marcus. Does she realize your property is an island lot? You aren't part of the HOA. You just own the land they lease for the pool. She has 0 authority over your primary residence. She knows, I said. She just doesn't care. She wants to make my life expensive until I give up the pool rights. Let her keep going, Silas advised. Every fine she issues is a nail in her coffin. It's called malicious interference with property rights. Keep every single piece of paper. Over the next 2 weeks, the paper blizzard intensified. Beverly hired a private security firm, not the friendly guys like Leo, but a group of compliance officers who would sit outside my house at 6:00 a.m. taking photos. They sent me a fine for my trash cans being out 10 minutes too early. They sent me a fine because my dog barked at a squirrel. Then came the physical escalation. I went to the pool on a Wednesday afternoon just for a quick swim. I found the gate locked with a heavy industrial-grade chain and a padlock. A sign had been bolted to the fence. Facility closed for emergency maintenance. Through the chain links, I could see the water. It was pristine. There was no maintenance. There were no workers, just the blue, shimmering water of my own land locked away from me. I looked up at the clubhouse security camera. I knew she was watching the feed. I pulled out my phone, took a photo of the chain, and sent it to Silas. She's blocked access, I texted. That's it, Silas replied. That's a material breach of the lease agreement. Article 12, Section 4. Any intentional obstruction of the lessor's access shall constitute a total default. Do you want to give her a warning, or do you want to end this? I looked at the lock. I thought about Tyler's mocking face. I thought about the police lights and Beverly's hissed promises to ruin me. I thought about my grandfather, Lolo, and how he never started a fight, but he always finished them. No more warnings, I whispered to the empty air. I walked back to my house, sat at my desk, and drafted a very specific email to the entire HOA board, not just Beverly. I CC'd every member whose email address was public record. The subject line was simple: notice of default and intent to terminate lease. I didn't mention the fines. I didn't mention Tyler. I only mentioned the lock. I gave them 48 hours to remove the obstruction and issue a formal apology, or I would trigger the 90-day liquidation clause. I hit send and waited. The response didn't come from the board. It came from Beverly's personal email 10 minutes later. It was only one sentence. "See you in court, peasant." She had no idea. She thought she was entering a courtroom. She didn't realize she was walking into a demolition zone. Beverly thought she was the law, but she forgot that an HOA is only as strong as its members' bank accounts. When the board found out, she'd gambled their multi-million-dollar amenities on a personal grudge. The Civil War began. Beverly's email was a declaration of war, but it was written in the blood of a community that didn't know it was bleeding yet. She hadn't told the rest of the board about the lock. She hadn't told them about the default notice. She was playing a high-stakes game of chicken with my land, and she was using the neighbor's property values as her chips. The 48-hour deadline I set came and went. The chain stayed on the gate. The emergency maintenance sign stayed bolted to the fence. On Friday morning, I didn't call Beverly. I didn't go to the pool. I went to the Crestwood Community Clubhouse, where the board was holding their monthly coffee with the president morning. Usually, it was a sleepy affair with 5 or 6 retirees complaining about mailbox colors. Not today. I walked in and the room went silent. Beverly was at the front, a coffee cup in her hand, looking like the cat that swallowed the canary. She smiled when she saw me. It was a victory smile. "I believe this is a members-only event, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I'd hate to have to call the authorities for trespassing again." I didn't stop at the door. I walked straight to the center of the room. I wasn't carrying a towel this time. I was carrying a stack of folders. "I'm not here for coffee, Beverly," I said, my voice echoing in the vaulted ceiling. "I'm here to hand-deliver the termination of lease to the board of directors. Since you chose not to share my default notice with your colleagues, I thought I'd do it for you." Arthur, the former president, stood up looking confused. "Termination? Marcus, what are you talking about? The lease has 7 years left." "It did," I said, turning to face him. "Until your president decided to illegally lock the landowner out of the property, ignore the cure period, and use HOA funds to hire private security to harass me at my home. Article 12 is very clear. A material breach that isn't cured in 48 hours results in the immediate right to terminate." I started handing out folders to the other 4 board members. As they opened them, I watched the color drain from their faces. They weren't looking at my fraudulent papers. They were looking at the photos of the chain. They were looking at the logs of the compliance officers Beverly had hired without board approval. They were looking at the peasant email she had sent from her official HOA account. "Beverly," Arthur's voice was a whisper, "did you lock the gate?" "It's maintenance," she snapped, though her confidence was visibly cracking. "He was a liability. I was protecting the association." "You weren't protecting us," Arthur said, his voice rising with a sudden, sharp realization. "You were settling a score, Marcus. If you terminate this lease, what happens to the pool?" I looked Beverly dead in the eye. "The contract states that upon termination for breach, the HOA has 90 days to vacate the land. You have to remove all movable improvements. The clubhouse, the playground, The fences, you take them with you. The pool itself, since you can't move a hole in the ground, it reverts to the landowner. The room erupted. One of the other board members, a woman named Sarah, stood up and pointed at Beverly. You did what? Do you know what this does to our home values? If we lose the pool, every house in this subdivision drops 20% in value overnight. He's bluffing, Beverly screamed, slamming her coffee cup onto the table. He's a small-time landlord. He won't walk away from the lease payments. The payments were $500 a month, Beverly, I said calmly. I spend more than that on my lawn care. I didn't do this for the money. I did it because my grandfather told me to be a good neighbor. But a neighbor who tries to put me in handcuffs for sitting on my own land, that's not a neighbor, that's a squatter. I turned to the rest of the room. The residents who had been whispering about me for weeks were now looking at Beverly with a new kind of intensity. It wasn't suspicion anymore. It was predatory. The clock is ticking, I said. 90 days, I suggest you start looking for a demolition crew or a very good lawyer. Because the next time I come to this gate, I won't be bringing a towel. I'll be bringing a fence of my own. I walked out of the clubhouse. Behind me, I heard the sound of 40 people all shouting at one woman at once. The crack in the foundation had become a canyon, and Beverly was standing right at the edge. The HOA didn't go quiet. They hired the most expensive lawyer in the state to sue me for bad faith. They thought they could use a courtroom to bully me into silence. They didn't realize that in a court of law, secrets are the first thing to be excavated. Beverly didn't resign. She didn't apologize. Instead, she doubled down with a madness that only a cornered narcissist can possess. 2 weeks after the clubhouse confrontation, I was served with a lawsuit. The HOA wasn't just fighting the termination. They were suing me for injunction of property rights and breach of implied covenant. Their argument was a masterpiece of desperation. They claimed that by leasing the land for a pool, I had created a permanent easement that I couldn't revoke, regardless of the contract. They were trying to take my land by legal force. The courtroom was packed. Half the neighborhood had shown up, some to support Beverly, but most because they realized their property values were hanging by a thread. Beverly sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing a power suit and a smug expression that said she had already won. Her lawyer, a shark named Harrison with a $3,000 suit, stood up and gave a soaring opening statement about community stability and the sanctity of suburban life. He painted me as a greedy landlord trying to hold a neighborhood hostage over a minor misunderstanding. Then it was Silas's turn. My lawyer didn't give a speech. He didn't talk about suburban life. He walked to the center of the room and placed a single piece of hardware on the evidence table. It was the rusted industrial chain and the padlock I had cut off the gate. Your Honor, Silas said, his voice like grinding stones, the defense isn't here to talk about feelings. We are here to talk about a contract that was physically and legally broken by the plaintiff. Silas began to enter the evidence. First, the security footage. He showed the court Beverly herself standing by the gate as the chain was wrapped around it. He showed the audio, recorded by a resident, of Beverly telling the guard, I don't care if it's his land, he doesn't exist until I say he does. The judge, a woman who looked like she had zero patience for HOA drama, leaned forward. Mrs. Beverly, did you personally authorize the locking of a property owner's access to his own land? Beverly stood up, her voice trembling. It was for safety, he was. A simple yes or no will suffice, the judge snapped. Yes, Beverly hissed. Then Silas dropped the bomb, the nuclear option. Your Honor, the plaintiff claims bad faith on my client's part. But during discovery, we subpoenaed the HOA's financial records. We wanted to see where the money for these compliance officers and this private security was coming from. Silas handed a document to the judge. It turns out Beverly wasn't just harassing my client. She was embezzling from the pool maintenance fund to pay for her private vendetta. She moved $12,000 of community money into a shell account to hire those guards who sat outside Mr. Sterling's house. She didn't just break a lease. She committed a felony against her own neighbors. The courtroom went from silent to a riot in 3 seconds. Neighbors who had been on Beverly's side moments ago were now standing up, screaming thief and traitor. The judge slammed her gavel so hard the sound echoed like a gunshot. Silence, or I will clear this room. She turned her gaze to Beverly, who had gone the color of ash. Mrs. Beverly, you are lucky I am a civil judge and not a criminal one, but as far as this lawsuit is concerned, motion for injunction is denied. The lease termination is valid. Mr. Sterling has every right to reclaim his property. Then the judge looked at me. Mr. Sterling, you gave them 90 days. I'm reducing it to 30. If this association cannot act with basic legality, they do not deserve the privilege of your land. I looked at Beverly. She was slumped in her chair, her kingdom crumbling around her. She had tried to take my peace, my reputation, and my rights. Now she had lost the respect of her neighbors, her position of power, and very soon, she would lose the one thing she valued most, her status. As we walked out of the courtroom, Arthur caught up to me. He looked broken. Marcus, please, is there any way to save the pool? We'll pay. We'll double the rent. We'll ban Beverly for life. I looked at him, then at the neighbors who were still shouting at each other in the hallway. Arthur, the time for being nice ended when the police showed up at my chair. Tell the residents to enjoy the water while they still can. In 30 days, the taps go dry. The 30 days were up. The water was gone. The elite of Crestwood stood at their windows and watched as I turned their paradise back into dirt. They thought they could ban me from the pool, so I made sure there was no pool left to ban me from. The 30 days following the court ruling were the loudest days in the history of Crestwood Estates. It wasn't the sound of splashing water or children laughing. It was the sound of panic. Beverly was gone. The board had ousted her within hours of the courtroom revelation. The thief and embezzler labels followed her everywhere. I heard she put her house on the market at a massive loss just to escape the glares of her neighbors. But her departure didn't change the reality of the dirt. The new HOA board, led by a humbled and desperate Arthur, tried everything. They sent me gift baskets. They offered to pay 5 times the original rent. They even offered to name the park after my grandfather. I ignored them all. Some lessons can't be taught with words, they have to be taught with loss. On the 31st day, at exactly 7 in the morning, the heavy machinery arrived. A fleet of dump trucks and a massive yellow bulldozer rumbling through the quiet, gated streets. The residents gathered at the perimeter fence, their faces pressed against the links like mourners at a funeral. First, the water was drained. I watched as thousands of gallons of crystal blue water, the water Beverly tried to guard like a dragon, swirled down the drains and disappeared into the sewer. Then came the liquidation. Because the HOA had failed to remove their movable improvements within the time frame, everything on that lot now legally belonged to me. The designer lounge chairs. I had them loaded onto a truck and donated to a local public park in a lower-income neighborhood. The high-end playground equipment, sent to a nearby orphanage. Then the bulldozer moved in. I stood on the edge of the property, my hands in my pockets, as the blade of the machine tore into the clubhouse walls. The glass shattered. The wood splintered. The exclusive sign that Beverly had used to intimidate me was crushed into toothpicks under the heavy treads. By sunset, the lot was flat. The pool had been filled with tons of raw, brown-filled dirt. There was no blue. There was no luxury. There was just an empty residential lot, exactly as it had looked when my Lolo first bought it decades ago. A week later, I closed the deal with a commercial developer. Because the subdivision was already built in a circle around this lot, it was the most valuable piece of commercial real estate in the area. Today, if you visit Crestwood Estates, you don't see a private pool. You see a 7-Eleven and a 24-hour laundromat. The elite residents who once looked down on me now have to listen to the ding of a convenience store door and the hum of industrial dryers. They have to see the neon signs glowing through their bedroom windows at 3 a.m. Every time they walk past to buy a gallon of milk, they are reminded of the woman who thought she could play God with someone else's land. As for Tyler, I saw him one last time as they were packing their U-Haul. He wasn't filming with his phone anymore. He looked small. He looked like a kid who realized that his mother's power was just a paper shield that I had set on fire. I sat on my porch, watched their truck drive away, and took a long sip of my coffee. My grandfather was right. Never sell the dirt, Marcus. It's the only thing that lasts. I didn't sell it for a long time, but when I finally did, I sold it to the one thing Beverly hated more than me, the public. Beverly thought she could use the law to steal my peace, but she ended up losing her community's paradise. In the end, the dirt always wins. What do you think? Did the HOA deserve to lose their pool because of one woman's ego, or should I have given the other neighbors a second chance? Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of suburban justice, hit that like button and subscribe for more. And remember, always check the lease before you start a war.